So I would like to officially invite our speaker for the day, Ashim, who is a founding partner at Aperio Partners. He has over 14 years of experience in the startup ecosystem. He has been partner at Venture, Uniprime Investment Advisors, a seasoned operator and an angel investor. He has played pivotal roles at companies like GeoHaptic and WeWork, contributing significantly to their success. Ashim's strength lies in strategic thinking, sales, partnership, global business development, startup growth, hacking, and leadership management. A Cornell alumni, his journey began in management consulting in Boston. Beyond startup, Hashim is also a fitness enthusiast who values sleep and wellness for peak productivity. With a passion for crafting impactful stories, Hashim believes in the power of innovation and sees entrepreneurs as the architects of the future. I would like to call upon Hashim to get started. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, good morning, everyone. Glad to finally see the room filling up. I thought probably just be me and family which will be listening to this session. So happy. I hope you've all had some breakfast because this is going to be a highly interactive session. I will not make this a one-way street, so I want all of you to constantly engage. I think before we get started, I'd love to do a quick show of hands. How many entrepreneurs in the room? I can see some who I know, but quick raise of hands. Okay, there's quite a bunch of them. And how many of you have already raised funding historically, or how many of you have raised funding historically? No. So you're okay, just two of you. And everybody else is looking to raise capital now or in the near future? Raise of hands. Okay, thank God. So I know this session is going to be fairly relevant to this audience. So my colleague here has obviously done a great job of walking through my journey, but I'll do a quick recap just so you know why we're having this session and why I'm sort of sharing from the learning that I've had in the past. So I actually started my career in the US. I started in consulting and soon after decided to come back to India, and obviously it wasn't easy. When you have a fancy job in the US, coming back to India, you're never going to be compensated the same as you are when you live in the US. So I realized that I'm going to obviously follow my entrepreneurial pursuits. And my first startup was in the referral recruitment space. Unfortunately, the business didn't take off as we hoped it would have. So I transitioned out. One of the partners continued to run the business, and after about 7 years, we sold that business to Naukri, but none of us really made a lot of money there, unfortunately. The second business was a mobile app platform. This was a very interesting journey. This is where I really started going door to door, educating people on why they should have an app. And if some of you who were in the main hall and you heard Kinner about his journey on how they enable entrepreneurs to create their entire web page and then start selling, we were doing something similar about 10 years ago. So this dates back in 2013. That journey was an absolute sort of learning for me, because that's when you all really start that everything in business is going to come down to how well you were able to sell that, right? So that kind of paved the way to what I was building. And then I put, the second part of my life, which is when we built the third startup. So after having sort of two failures in the journey, which didn't necessarily take off, the third company was a conversational AI platform. This is in the time of 2015, when WhatsApp was bought out by Facebook for about $19 billion. We realized that the whole world is going to move to communication. So how do we enable people to interact and do things better? That gave birth to a company called Haptic, which is some of you may have read. We sold that business to Reliance in 2019 for $100 million. It was one of the most successful exits at the time. And after that exit, I started sort of actively investing in startups. I now have a portfolio of about 45 startups, taken a few exits already, and I've probably spoken to over 2,000-3,000 founders over the last sort of 4 or 5 years that I've been investing. After the 3 startup stints, I decided that I will take one role in corporate India, and that's when I used to head business development for WeWork, which again, some of you may know, globally has had a tough time, but India is a franchise operation that continues to grow profitably. So we went from about 15 buildings when I was there to about 40 buildings. We're talking about 30,000 people to about 70,000 people who work in WeWork in India. So that's been the journey. And that sort of lays the foundation of what we're going to discuss over the next 30-40 minutes. Which is funding winter. I'm sure a lot of you heard about that. But before I jump into that, let me show you some very interesting stats. This is a report which Bloom, which is one of the most popular funds in India, actually just released yesterday. So for all the entrepreneurs who want to understand broadly the world of VC investments, what it takes for investors to write checks, I highly encourage you to look at this. And I thought this is very relevant because the timelines are similar, right? I came back in 2011 and this is 2023, and this is literally what the world looked like, right? At that point of time, there were only about 20 million Instagram users. Today, there's 1.3 billion Instagram users. We've gone from about $5 per GB internet in India to less than 15 cents, right? So these are all statistics for India. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. We've gone 10x in terms of smartphone users, right? So for a lot of people, and I'm happy to obviously walk through the journey, but I think you can see some of these numbers here. The statistics here are obviously for Bloom Fund, so they're talking about how much money they were putting in deals at that time, about 12 years ago, and how many deals they do now. They went from about 450 deal count at that point to about 1,600 deals now they have sort of seen. But the reason I want to put this statistic is one of the reasons for companies to be successful or for them not to take off. In our case, I had two of those which didn't take off, was just wrong timing, right? When I mentioned the first startup that we did in referral recruitment and the second business in the mobile app, the only reason is we were just too early for the market. And to give you a little bit more specific, at the time we created about 450 mobile phone apps, personalized apps for restaurants, hotels, retail, real estate owners, spas, salons, name it, and we did it. And these are very, very big names, right? But the app was the easy part, but getting people to actually download the app and use the product was the tough part. So kind of goes back to saying that when you're building a product or a service, you want to see who are the users and how they're going to use your product. So that brings me to stuff that's going on in the news today, right? You're obviously reading this. We've gone less than half of the funding in the last year and a half. In terms of deal volume, I think we're about 79%, startup funding has tanked. So obviously, what's the reason behind this? There are broadly 3 or 4 large functions that have led to this decline. One is obviously, as we all know, global investment cycles go through recurring phenomena. And right now, we've just come out of a bull run and we're just watching what's happening. There obviously has been a recessionary trend. The geopolitical causes, we all know about the Ukraine war, we all know what's going on in Gaza. So all of these factors are obviously massively impacting this, right? So what does this broadly sort of mean, right? Now there's a massive negative influence. Obviously, we know these things. A lot of companies have started laying off employees. They've raised lots of money. They thought they're going to solve the problem by throwing capital at the problem, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. You're seeing, people are now obviously reducing a lot of their marketing spend. So across the board, not small or medium, but even large companies have pulled back significantly on marketing. And then obviously a lot of companies are now getting sold at distressed values, right? So a lot of companies which potentially saw that they were going to be acquired at 10x, 20x, 30x are now being sold at less than 1x on their capital, right? Because they're just not capital efficient. Now here's an interesting silver lining, right? What does this do for early stage startups? So these are the positives. It actually gives an opportunity for smaller startups to now kind of bring out their efficiency and become more noticed in the ecosystem, right? Because historically, large players, which were heavily funded, had all the marketing dollars to reach out to audiences and buy the audiences, if you will. But today, that isn't the case, right? Today, a great product and a great service will triumph over capital. And so for a lot of founders who are now saying, hey, listen, there's a funding winter, what do I do? But if your product is actually solving for a real problem, you're actually better positioned to go and raise that money on the back of that efficient system that you've built. And obviously, you're talking of, there's a renewed focus on cost of acquisition. I'm assuming all of you here understand cost of acquisition. Anybody who doesn't? Okay, cool. So, you spend a lot of money to acquire these customers, whether it's digital, it's physical, now the world is digital, so you've got to have omnipresent channels, you're going to do it online as well as offline. There's a massive sort of attempt at sort of ensuring that your cost of acquisition is reduced so that your unit economics works out, right? So unit economics is for every dollar that I spend, am I actually getting a return which is higher than that and not burning money on every transaction. And obviously leads to operational efficiencies. So I'm going to sort of wrap the first part of this funding winter session on what is it that investors are looking for now, right? So they're saying that we want to look at businesses which have very clear-cut unit economics in place. They have a balanced growth and profitability. So they're saying that we don't expect you to grow at 70-80% month on month. You're okay to grow at 5, 7, 10%, but do it consistently and make sure you're doing it without burning too much capital. they're looking at obviously products that have found a product market fit. So as even the angel investors, back in the days we would happily write checks on companies, but today we're asking the tough questions to the founders, right? We're saying, hey, is your product actually solving a real problem? And if that's the case, can you show us specifics of, how your users are coming back to, use that, right? So that's retention metrics, and I'll cover some of that in the following slides. And then obviously, looking at efficient working capital management. What does that mean? Right? You just want to make sure that you're somehow, reducing your burn, which means either you're, improving on your renegotiating your debt repayments. You're figuring out how do you reduce your spend on employees. I actually have a lot of founders who reach out to me within my portfolio and saying, hey, listen, we have a little bit of cash crunch, what do we do? And our usual thing is that you just start lay off people because they've been around with you for the longest period. So reduce the amount that you're paying them and maybe offset that with equity stock options, right? So you increase your stock options. There are some classic examples in my portfolio. In fact, one of the companies which is kind of a star in our portfolio is a company called Stage. Has any one of you heard of this company called Stage here? No? Okay, I'll give you a quick 1 minute on Stage. These are founders from Tier 3 India. They built a company called Witty Feed, which was second to BuzzFeed, and were at one point scaling about 1 crore a month. This is a platform which will create content on the back of Facebook. And overnight, Facebook changes policies and their business went to zero. Now imagine a business generating 1 crore a month, waking up next day and seeing you're going to get zero. So these guys obviously rose from the ashes and said, we're going to rebuild another business, but this time we will not build on the back of another platform, but we will own the customer. So they ended up understanding and recognizing the opportunity and created an OTT platform called Stage. The reason it's called Stage is because they create content in local dialects. So this is not languages, but it is dialects. They go and hire talent in Tier 3 cities. They actually produce that content and then obviously sell it to that same audience. And you'll be surprised, the cost of content creation is 1/10 of what an Amazon Prime and Netflix spends. They are able to charge customers in Tier 3 and Tier 4 India between $299 and $399. And about 50% of their customers are first-time users who've ever paid on the internet, right, on their mobile phone. Now, this is a classic example of somebody saying that let me understand an opportunity, let me go and solve for that need and do it efficiently, right? So today, they've gone live with Haryanvi, which is a dialect again. It's a form of Hindi, but in a different dialect. They've been profitable in that market already. They've now launched Rajasthani as in their folklore, and now they will be raising a much larger round to multiply that into multiple other dialects, right? The reason I wanted to share that story is that their team has been with them from day one. Even when they were completely down to zero and had no monies to pay salaries to the employees stuck around because they knew that this was a very tight ship that they were sailing. They obviously increased their employee stock option, all of that, and obviously these guys are obviously now going to build a fortune on the back of that, right? So there's always creative hacks at solving problems. You just have to look at it in the right direction. So that's kind of where we are, right? Any questions, any doubts? Can I maybe stop here if anybody has any questions?
You came from Shark Tank, right?
I'm sorry?
You came from Shark Tank.
They came on Shark Tank as well. Yeah, that was very recently. They were shown Shark Tank. Any other questions? Yes.
Has AI like ChatGPT contributed to this funding decline?
Has funding declined in ChatGPT?
As in companies employing AI contributed to this funding decline?
Oh, okay. So that broadly the term is referred to as generative AI. I think we're still in very nascent stages of what's happening in generative AI, and I'm glad you kind of brought it up because my last company was in conversational AI business that we sold. It's quite unfortunate in India. A lot of people loosely use the term AI. So invariably you talk to 50 founders, 40 of them will say, "Oh, we built this AI company," and I'm like, "Okay, well, please walk me through where the AI really happening." Right? Which is the same case as a lot of people who would walk up and say, "I built this tech company." And what does this tech company do? It's a platform that enables you to find person from A to B or get. That's really, there isn't tech, that's just an enabler. Today, the TV and the screen is an enabler for me to talk to you, but that's not technology that I'm building here, right? So you have to really understand where is technology innovation happening versus where are you just using that as an enabler. And today's world, everything will have technology by default. So those are not tech companies, they're actually services companies. And if you look around yourself, right, everything that you use today between a Swiggy, Zomato, Uber, music apps, they're all services. At the end of the day, they're managing hundreds of millions of people on the ground that are moving. They're hardcore operational led businesses. Technology is enabling that And using AI, you're only doing it better, right? So, classic case, Netflix. Every person here will see a different home screen on Netflix. That's because they understand your choice of content and they're picking out the right content that will attract you. And I don't know how many of you know, but even the same title, the same movie, we will all have a different screenshot of this movie that will be shown to us depending on what kind of content we like. Right? So that's using AI to improve their efficiency of making sure that you're sticking to that longer. But that's not the business that they're in, right? They're, at the end of the day, they're business of distribution of content, which is a whole different ballgame. And this is only enabling every part of the process and ensuring that it kind of does the job better. So the next sort of 15-20 minutes I want to walk you through, which I feel might be relevant to a lot of people here, is what should your pitch deck to investors look like? I did this session roughly about a year ago with Kerala Startup Mission, one of their panels, and it was very well received because what I've seen across hundreds of thousands of founders I speak to, we receive decks which are usually 30, 40, 50 pages long. First of all, no investor has the time to go through a 40-pager, right? So they want to get the crux of the problem and understand how you're solving it. And two, they just usually miss out on some of the key elements. So I've taken an attempt to put just about 8 slides, which in our experience, and obviously I'm sure a bunch of you read around globally, is probably the perfect sort of position of what those 8 slides should look like. And then you can put a lot of slides in the appendix, which is that hey, if I'm somebody as an investor who's keen to understand numbers, then you can walk me detailed in numbers. If I'm a technology guy who understands very hardcore data and tech, then I want to spend time on technology, then you can skip some of that. But at least give me a broad sense of what the tech should look like. So we'll just go through each of these slides, and I think this will be an interactive piece because every slide I'd love to hear from you how you guys have historically done this, and if you see there's stuff that we can add on that. Are we all good with that?
Yes.
Awesome. So slide number 1 is your problem statement and what's the market size, right? Now, one of the challenges that we've seen here is that I actually just finished one session with a founder earlier this morning only, and he's a very interesting guy talking about how do you solve for dementia and all of that, right? And I just said, okay, but where does this problem get identified? Who's identifying that problem? At what stage? Who's your target audience who's going to buy for that service, pay for that service? At what stage? So none of that was all missing, right? So the reason I put this is that if you historically look at businesses that have done extremely well, are founders who have a deep connect with the problem statement, right? Either they have personally faced it or they have somebody in their close family or friends who faced it, so they truly understand the problem, right? The first question that an investor will ask a founder is, why is this particular team the best team to solve this problem? So you have to really fully understand what is the problem at hand that you're solving. And another thing that a lot of founders end up doing is, oh, I've built this great app, right? Or I've built this website and I'm going to do this. And then we're like, have you done your research well? Because you got to study that somebody somewhere is most likely already doing something similar. So you have to learn from what some of the other guys have historically done or in that space delivered on. And I, a lot of time when I spend time with early stage founders and students from college, I say just spend that extra 1 or 2 months in just researching, and you'll be amazed at the outcome that you will find. Another exciting founder in our portfolio, a company called Kutum. Have anybody of you heard of Kutum? A social community app? Raised loads of money. Okay, interesting guy. The founder had a book with about 350 interviews before he started building the business. Right, that is fascinating. That's the level of detail that we're looking at people in trying to solve that problem. All of you heard Ramiz Ali yesterday, the entrepreneur. Did anyone spend time with him after that to understand what it took him to build this business? I was fascinated about how he was going about solving this problem. I'm just, again, 2 minutes, right? He's building a business on helping kids from the age of 3 to 10 in interpersonal skills and on a one-on-one learning module, which is been there, done that historically, right? But he said we have 5,000 faculty members who are impaneled with us, and they are coaching these kids one-on-one, and we record all these sessions and we measure the ability of each of these professors or these faculty members on how they're coaching these students, And then every time we have to connect to a new student, we change that, right? Because we're constantly refining our module on who's the perfect student to the perfect teacher for that session. So it's not like, oh, I've got this one teacher who's going to teach English and now all 100 students will have that session or whatever, right? They're constantly refining that model. So that's the amount of detail that goes into defining a successful model versus another model. Because it's very easy, right? You can put 500 teachers on one side, you can put 500 students on another side, let them match and the business is done, right? That's how easy. But that's not the reality, right? So I think that's what we're saying. And then he spent that time understanding the real problem statement. And again, I don't want to go into further detail, but even on his fundraising piece, when he started the business, he said, I went every household in his little village and convinced the parents on why their student or their kid who was 5 years or 7 years old needed this extra hand-holding in improving their social skills, intercommunication, and so on and so forth. And he said our first 100 parents were the real supporters of how I built this business. And just FYI, I think today he's now, I think, north of 2.5 crores a month, if I remember correctly. Right, so his journey was bootstrapped, guys. So he's a 25 crore business, bootstrapped, he's not raised a single dollar of money from the market. Right, so that's what I'm saying, it just takes that in less than 2 years. So fascinating story. And then, market size. Again, great to put millions of dollars and all that, but you have to again recognize where is it that your product will really go. What is the ability of the customer to pay? Invariably in India, what we've seen over the last 10 years, the first slide that I showed on 2011 and 2023 India, the paying capacity has continued to be in tier 1, tier 2 cities, but as we move into a 4 trillion economy and as our GDP starts to increase, the GDP per capita is only going to enable the next, what we call the middle of the pyramid to increase, and that's the aspirational India which will be making that purchase, right? So, which is where if you actually start looking at a lot of investment theses, they're all going in the middle India story because that's where the real size and scale is, right? And they are happy to pay sachet pricing, but the volume is there. And so when you're building your module, it's very important to ask these questions. How big is the market, and then who is going to pay for that? Before I go to the next slide, any observations, any thoughts that anybody has on this slide or any questions? Anyone? No, we're all good? Yes, please.
We always talk about the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah.
But there was recent conversations around how India's. Sorry, did you get my?
Yeah, you mentioned about the bottom.
Yeah, we always talk about the bottom of pyramid when it comes to India, but now there is also a market being created around luxury products, and I think a lot of luxury brands are now coming into India, and the growth rate is pretty impressive. In fact, it's more than the Europe growth rate. So what do you sense about that market?
Yeah. So, like anything else in the world, you do know the richest man is the owner of LVMH, right? Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, build the largest luxury brand in the world, right? So, like anything in the world, there will be a market at the top and there will be a market at the bottom. It depends which market are you going after. Which is why when I mentioned that as you're defining the problem statement and your sort of market size, you have to be very clear on who it is that you're selling to. You could make a boatload of money by only selling to the top 1%. That's what Cred did, right? Cred, you all know Cred, right? Only said that I will cater to credit card holders in the country who have data of millions of users who are only buying, or who you have to have a minimum credit spend and so on and so forth, and I'll give you points. But all he was essentially doing is building a rapport on the user profile to understand what does this user who owns between say 50 to 80 lakhs, lives in Bangalore between the ages of 30 to 35 does, and then I can constantly sell them other products and services, right? And that's the model. So there's a market for everyone, right? And then you have the Parle-Gs of the world, right, that have also built a formidable business in the country. So it's about where you're going after, and each of these markets are large enough, right? But you just have to go very laser focused. And like anything else in life, you will see they start super laser focused, and then with time they will grow there, right? So Swiggy and Zomato, look back at what they did in 2011 and what they're doing today. Significantly different, right? A lot of you might have used their service of delivery from point A to point B, which they call Swiggy Genie. And that was born out of a need where 3 other guys did it, burned their hands, and these guys figured out they already had the staff on ground and they could deliver on top of that. So it's about identifying who the market is and then sort of building on top of that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Cool. The next slide, which is a no-brainer, is a solution, right? Now again, kind of digging very deep into that, I did have a chat with somebody yesterday who said I had an idea of an app. And the first question when somebody comes and says I have an idea for an app is, am I going to use this app every day? If the answer is no, then I'm sort of rolling my, and we're going to use it every week, and the answer is no, most likely I don't think I'm having a conversation with the founder, right? Because I'll encourage all of you to open your phone and see how many apps you use every day. And I can bet that none of us have more than 5 to 7 apps that we use every day. And I can walk you through that, right? There's a news app, there's a music app, there's your finance app or whatever you use. There's your food delivery app, there's your shopping app, and there's your social media app. And besides these 6, 7 functions, tell me there's anything else that you guys do every day on the app. Right? The answer is no. So, and why is that? Right? Because it's user, that's the need. Right? You're solving a real need for the user, and so therefore they're using it. Right? They're using Uber and Ola came around because there was a mobility challenge, and they said, you guys know the story of Travis, right? Has anybody, do you guys know how Travis came up with the idea of Uber? No? Okay, cool. So I'll give you another quick intro into that. So he was supposed to go to a conference and he got late, he couldn't get a local cab. So he was not allowed to enter the conference. And I think that same phenomena occurred the second time around. And he said, here I'm invited to this super amazing conference and I can't even get there because I couldn't get a cab. So he started this very high-end luxury service of only enabling cabs. That was called Uber Black. Right? And it kind of started from there to obviously where Uber today is. So it's always about a very specific need and then sort of very targeted approach, and then slowly sort of grows into market. And then I think for the first few years, they only did one city, then they went to multiple cities in the US, and international expansion was probably year 7 or year 8 onwards. Right? So another thing that I see in a lot of founders early days is they start with a solution, they do it in one city, and they're like, oh, but actually I'm thinking of doing this global, I'm thinking maybe I do it in Gulf because GCC has more money, and maybe I do it in US. My friend, you have to pick one market and solve for it. You can't be everywhere, right? Because you can't build a business in year 1 in 6 different cities. Right? So you have to get your unit economics right, you have to get your playbook right in one region, then grow into 5, 50, and then kind of the journey goes on from there, right? So the reason I said this is you have to know what is the pain point you're solving and then what is the module, right? Are you now using a website? Is it a marketplace? Is it an app? Is the app truly solving that problem? What is the customer experience, right? A lot of times people just say, oh, I want to solve this problem, but let me tell you, the only reason these apps are successful is because the customer experience is first ever, right? Gunnar Shah of Cred had actually mentioned this very interestingly. He said there's a delta of experience that defines that you will move from one experience to the other. IRCTC case in point. Historically, we would stand in a line to get a train ticket, and then IRCTC came around and they said you could do this online and made sure the experience was absolutely flawless, and we moved. Book My Show started with a B2B business. They went and enabled theater owners to manage their inventory, built a B2B business for many years, and later opened that to the consumer, and that's how Book My Show became what Book My Show today is as a consumer experience. So it's very, very important for you to get the the fundamentals right before you sort of get into sort of the next stage. But you know why I'm spending some time on the solution? Because you have to be very laser focused on what is that solution that you're trying to solve. It can't be a very vague, oh, we're building this app and does this. If it was that easy, then every Tom, Dick and Harry would have solved that and turned it into $1 billion idea, right? So you have to really go super focused. Any questions? Yes, please.
So actually, a lot of the time, investors also say there's an opportunity cost. So you have something, just go start with the MVP.
Yeah.
And then you can keep iterating it as time goes, right?
Yeah.
So what if the MVP is not so perfect in terms of user experience and such?
Thanks for bringing it up. Actually, I should add it to the slide. So MVP, the minimum viable product, is the first starting point, right? A boy here who met me yesterday mentioned that he had an idea. Did I talk about the idea now? Get your idea out in public? No? Okay. Anyway, he had an idea in dating and very simple, right? He's like, oh, I don't know where to start. I said, boss, it doesn't take too long. You just have to get these pieces off the ground and get 50 of your friends. Please tell them if that's what I told you yesterday. Right? Just get 50 of your friends to use it. That will tell you if you're really solving a problem or not. So you can't say, oh, I have this idea. That's what a lot of fun. Oh, I have this idea, and then either they will go out and raise a lot of money and then put like hundreds of people to try to solve without even recognizing, and your 50 friends or whatever will be your first touch point. But then you do quick, today, thanks to the internet, man, you have access to anybody in any part of the world. So just pick 20 other people in different cities and just say, hey, what are your thoughts? And let me tell you, an idea is as good as an idea unless executed well, right? So a lot of people come and say, oh, I have this great idea, and I'm like, great. I mean, guess what? I just heard this idea 20 minutes ago by somebody else. Doesn't matter, man. Who's going to execute this on ground is going to make the difference. So, again, referring to Ramiz Ali, right? Coaching one-on-one. Very simple. All of you guys are it, and the way he's gone about executing the idea, I don't think I've seen any other founder do it. Right? So it's your ability to think through every little element of the journey of that product or service that will sort of define. So, to your point, the MVP, and which is why this build fast, fail fast. You want to get it out to your customer and just get your first feedback, right? If it doesn't work, you make a quick edit and you do your next version. But you have to get it out. You can't sit on that product and service for 8 months and say, oh, this will be the perfect experience. But you need to know even that simple problem statement that you're solving has to be seamless. It can't be a buggy experience. You can't expect today a customer to wait on something and keep loading or saying, oh, now you want me to click 5 times. That's just basic elements of design and experience. And if you don't have it, then hire somebody who has it, right? But the expectations are set very high. Now, this probably could have passed about 15 years ago when the world looked very different. But today, there are apps like Builder.ai that will get you an app that is no code, low code coding platform that will give you an app in 30 minutes. So you can go and say, I want an Uber kind of app that instead of sending cabs will send food on that's your Swiggy. Right? So people will say, I'm building a Swiggy for X, I'm building an Uber for Y. Right? So all of these are ready-made platforms. You just have to pick the platform, put your product, and get it to ship. At the end of the day, it's a service business. If you're doing service, if you're doing tech businesses have a very long R&D cycles, right? We're talking of EV. Just yesterday, I read an article that there's some thermal battery that are being created that is going to completely change the way they're far more effective than lithium ion. Now, this is going to be revolution, right? So the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation is backed as a startup. I think they raised some $20-30 million. That's real. Now, that company would have probably taken 5 years to get there. That's just because they're doing R&D on a piece that hasn't been done before. But if you're building another product or service, you've got to be able to use a quick, turnaround time and get it to market. Any other questions?
Yeah, one question.
Sure, please.
So basically, you were talking about Book My Show. Initially, it is a B2B company, what I understand. So then they gone and realized it can be a B2C. So this journey, create a B2C identification, there is some investment required, right? So how on the investment perception? So what will be the advice from you is actually on the conversation, like how to convince an investor to bet on this?
So, Bhavil, first, this is a very long journey, so it wasn't something that happened, overnight. Two, what they've done is that they created so much of data points on the entire theater ecosystem that the timing was right for them to say that if we today open to the customer, the entire experience of both the partner and the customer will become easier, right? So there was almost an unmet need that was being seen that, we've now, that at that time, let's assume they had over 1,000 theaters, right? So they had data on 1,000 theaters and how the seats look like. And these guys were constantly booking and selling off the counter. They said, now can I make this experience far more easier to a customer to pick that seat themselves? But by then, they'd already solved all the problems at the point, right? Have you ever seen in Book My Show when you click the theater, the pricing changes from row C to D to E to F, right? Now, my thought is in about 2 years, they will even change the seat pricing from the side to the middle to the bottom. I mean, they could do anything now, right? This could be all based on the demand, they could even change in real time. So if they start seeing a lot of tickets being sold, they can immediately change the price of the last 10 seats, right? So this is technology enabling them to do a better job. But this all has happened over a period of, now they're more than a decade, they're I think 15 years into the business, right? So we're talking a very long journey. As angel investors or investors, when they're backing companies at an early stage, they're really backing the founder, right? The idea is as good as an idea, but they're saying, is this founder really has the ability to think through a lot of these things so that if tomorrow businesses change, and the world will change, right? We're moving to a world where you're not going to carry a phone. In about 5 years, you'll have it on your wrist. In about 7 years, you'll be wearing Vision Pro, so you won't really have, it's already live, right? So I met somebody in Dubai who had an implant done, chip implanted already, 2 of those. He said, I was doing a study, the company didn't allow me to do it, so then I quit the company and I do it, and I'm now starting on this. So they're all becoming a reality of life. So what you're saying is that these are all natural progressions of the business, very hard to tell when they'll happen, right? And as investors, you're seeing the ability of the founders to be able to keep up with that change, right? It's somebody who can think on their feet and execute and sort of get it. Does that sort of answer your question? Cool. the third slide, the business model, right? Very, very critical because again, gone are the days where you could build businesses and raise money on the back of saying that I have 1 million users and I have eyeballs and I'll figure out how to make money. No investor is going to touch your business, right? So you want to have a very strong business model. You want to be able to define what your customer profile looks like. How much are they? How are you distributing? What is your pricing? If you're a SaaS company, software as a service, you're defining with a freemium model. If it is, if you're going on a long-term bait, what does it look like on a monthly, quarterly, silver, platinum plans? Just there's so much out there, right? I mean, in each of these elements, you can each of these elements can warrant 10 slides each, right? But the idea is that I want founders should think about this when they're putting that deck, right? Because these things are missing. A lot of these guys will send these 50 sliders, and a lot of these, there's no thought that go to market, we will go through sales agents. What does that even mean? Is this an offline sales agent? Is it feet on street? Do you have the capability of running a feet on street? Because if a consumer brand comes to me and saying, I'm building this consumer brand, my first question is, do you know how hard is it to get distribution? How will you get to 10,000 and then 100,000 stores in the country? Right? If you don't know these questions, most likely no investor is going to put money in that business, right? So it's really understanding some of these elements very, very deeply before you sort of go into it. And the reason I sort of put this in sort of these 8 slides is because this is sort of your first preview into your business, right? It represents that you've thought through this, and then a very detailed profile can go into your appendix, right? So there you can draw exactly that, hey, if I'm building a feet on street model, this is what it will look like, this is the average spend on a feet on street, they will cover these many regions, they will potentially bring those many clients. And in many ways, a lot of this will be based on some empirical research or some data that you've historically delivered, right? You can't come out of nowhere and say, oh, I'm going to build this business and become a 1,000 crore business overnight. That's obviously never happening. So you have to sort of be able to think through all of this when you're putting it in your pitch deck. Make sense? Everybody on board? Awesome. Slide 4. Very, very important is to put some level of traction at your go-to market, right? Today, unlike earlier, again, investors are going to ask a tough question is, if you've had a business, what has the response been? Have you had some users? Have you had initial, take on whatever your product service is? If these users used you, how many times did they come back to you? Are they paid users? Are they freemium users? What are the channels, right? Which is what I talk about. Is it a B2B? Is it a B2C? Is it a B2B2C? B2C obviously is extremely cash guzzling because you're acquiring customers in a country like ours becomes very cash expensive. So that's why investors are now starting to slightly sly away from that and backing a lot of B2B. And then B2B2C are great because, again, we give examples, people doing business with universities, and each of these universities have access to hundreds of thousands of students. So, you get 50 universities, you get 100,000 users, and now you can actually build a product on the back of selling to these students, right? So there are great models around getting to market, but you have to be able to put all of this in your deck, right? It's very important for the investor to see how are you thinking about solving this problem, who is your end customer, and what are the channels you're using, right? Digital, physical. All of you obviously here, some of you heard D2C, direct to consumer, as a very hot business model, right? But very hard to scale after a certain point. Most businesses in D2C have plateaued at the 100 crore mark. And the reason is because there aren't enough users to buy that product or service beyond 100 crore. So then they start putting offline stores. Well, the offline stores come at a price. Is their product really worth putting in an offline store? What is the cost per square footage that you're going to spend to sell your product, which is worth, say, 100 or 200 rupees? It has to be large enough. So a lot of things have to go through that thinking. That's what investors are looking at, right? So when they're backing you, they're seeing, does this founder necessarily have the nuances and the know-how of running that business that they're getting into? And there is also empirical data, which, like I said, the Bloom report actually does a great job. For some of you who walked in late, I started my presentation with a slide on Bloom report. I'll probably go back to it later. But they just released a report from 2011 to now, all the funds, how the funds have performed, and which founders took off, what kind of businesses took off, and kind of what the learnings were. The reason I bring that out is that people are now shying away from models where you're going to spend a lot of money to acquire customers, right? You have to find ways to build this sustainably, and that's the only way to build a real business moving forward. My favorite one, financial projections. The reason I say this is because every founder will send you this J curve, right? So they're like nowhere and then suddenly it takes off. So you're doing 100,000, you do 500,000, you do a million, 5, 10, and the next thing you know, you're a 100 million company in year 3. I'm yet to see a company that does $100 million in year 3, except for maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, right? I wish the world was that simple. Let's be honest to ourselves, it doesn't work that way. So you have to be extremely pragmatic about financial projections. It's okay to put projections until year 3, year 4. You don't have to put a 10-year plan. Nobody knows what the world is going to look like 10 years from now. Nobody predicted COVID. No one predicted the rise and fall of EdTech in this country. And you know I'm referring to the big names which have done whatever they have done. But you should have very pragmatic approach on if today I've done, based on my historical traction, I've been able to get to a certain point. If I were to put extra capital, your playbook has to be ready, right? That's what the investor is saying. Is your playbook really ready to say if this small region with 10 employees and 30 clients is delivering this much, then if you were to multiply this 5 times over, what does it look like? They're not saying you're going to grow this 50 times. It's humanly impossible to grow from 5 to 50 overnight. Oyo did the same thing, WeWork did the same thing, and we all know what happened to these businesses, right? They went from 30, 50 billion in that one city to 500 billion globally, and the companies have crashed now in their port, right? So let's be pragmatic that these things take time. Rome wasn't built overnight, these businesses are not going to be built overnight. So your projections have to be very much in line. And I can't possibly think of any fund who's ever sent me a financial projection that we've gone back and we said, maybe Govind, you can tell me what are your thoughts on that? Because you look at a lot of pitches. Is that true? So you just have to be real about it, guys. Like, if somebody's investing money, they've most likely seen enough of this, or they build company themselves, they know what it takes to build it, so you can't possibly fool an investor. So be pragmatic about it. Be very wise about how you're projecting this. Talk about retention and churn. Talk about if you're a B2B player, how many users are being retained. Even if it's on a 6-month, 12-month program, put those numbers out there. It's always better to over-communicate and put it out there so the investor knows that you're being upfront. Because the one thing that is not going to scale anymore is hiding/governance issues, which obviously we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation. But that is continuing to be the biggest challenge, right? Today, I think investors are saying, how do I find authentic founders, right? Forget everything else. How do I find authentic founders who are solving real problems? Because that's really the biggest cheer. My favorite piece, I usually jump to this slide much earlier, is please put competition. A lot of people, just yesterday we were discussing, right? Do you know what is the competition for Netflix? You know what I'm saying. Anybody, can you tell me what's the competition to Netflix? Yeah, it was sleep, right? Like every business in the world has some competition. So when people say, oh, I don't have competition, I'm hard to believe that, right? There's somebody somewhere in the world already done it, or is thinking about it, or has some level of product out there. So you really have to do your research well. One of the challenges that I find with smaller cities and founders are that they're doing that in a small cocoon. So they're in that small world and think, oh, this is a great product. And they're not realizing that somebody else in another city has already built and executed on that product. So you should learn what has worked, what has not worked for them, and then draw parallels from them. Right? Yesterday, somebody was pitching Access Homes, which is this whole business of putting phlebotomist, which is this person who draws blood from you from home. Right? So they said, oh, what ThyrocAre and all these large metropolis does, we actually have people on ground. They go around to homes, they collect the blood and take it to the lab, and we make 20%. Something like great. I mean, cool, but I mean, there are large players, behemoths who've done this. So how are you going to execute better than them, right? And if you're going to execute this better, who's going to foot the bill for this? Are you going to acquire customers by advertising it directly? Because ThyrocAre and Metropolis has a larger reach with their thousands of labs across the country than you who's just starting out. So you have to think through all of this very well, right? And then learn from them. The easiest hack in this, by the way, which I don't usually tell to a lot of people, is as founders, you can reach out to competition and pretend that you're hiring talent, and they'll give you everything about the company. So you can learn so much about them by just saying, hey, listen, I'm hiring for a sales role. Tell me what works, what doesn't work. How did you guys do this? You got all your answers, man. I mean, there's many ways to figure out shit in this country, right? You just have to be creative about that. You can't just think on every, okay, let me now do this again because somebody else hasn't done it right. You need to have that extra edge in executing that business better. Any questions? We're on the last slide. Obviously, the most important slide, and this is what people are backing at early stages, is the team, right? One of the two reasons why companies fail, right? One, we spoke about timing. The other is team dynamics. Invariably, out of my 45 investments, I've had 4 write-offs. 2 write-offs are actually because of co-founder conflicts. And that usually happens as money starts kind of trickling in, and then one co-founder has some other thoughts and ideas, whether it's personal or it's professional, and they will just drag the company down, right? So it is extremely important when you're building your team, especially a lot of people will have a co-founder. It's important, in my opinion, broadly to at least have a sounding board. So you have a co-founder, then those team dynamics are very, very tight, right? You're both in it for the long haul for the right reason. And sometimes it takes a year or two just finding that co-founder, right? And again, go back in history and see most companies that have done extremely well, the co-founders are people who've known each other, as they call chart buds, right? They grew up together, they were in school together, they were in college together, and so they literally know every vulnerability of each other, and so they can speak it out upfront, right? So therefore that relationship will last. But if your relationship doesn't last the test of time, invariably the company will have to bear the brunt of it. So your team is very, very important in that you define roles and responsibilities of co-founders, you define how you are hiring your first layer of your execution team and so on and so forth. And the unique insights is kind of going back to my earlier point is, as an investor, the first question somebody's going to ask is, why should I back this team in solving this problem? How are you best positioned to solve this problem in the world, right? Because somebody somewhere else can do this better than you. So that comes to saying, hey, because of your journey, your past life of say 20 years or 15 years or 8 years of experience in a certain company, you picked some of the hacks and nuances that nobody else did, and you feel you're better positioned to solve that problem. That's what people are looking for. And the last slide, which is when you're raising capital, right? Be very specific how much amount you're raising, right? Talk about your ESOP pool, talk about how much you raised historically. There's a fair amount of deep dive that investors are doing today. There's a strong due diligence. I can tell you some mishap stories also very quickly, but a company which was raising money came around, and I did a check with some of the other investors. Somebody said, no, there was some problem, and the problem was very deep. So they had an entire, they had a sales story that they'd shown, and they were receiving those amounts. And they said, okay, it looked fine in the books. But then this one person who did due diligence actually said, who are these customers? And when they opened the customers and saw their background, they were all actually extended family and friends. So family and friends had created companies where this money was getting rerouted. So essentially the money was just rotating back into the family, and he said, oh, I'm already growing my business overnight. Now that's a red flag, right? So, today people are going to do a lot of governance, like a lot of due diligence, right? Because governance is becoming the largest issue, right? So even when you're putting the ask, be very clear. This is how I initialize my initial capital. This is how friends and family invested. This is very clear cut. Is it a convertible note? Is it a price round? What was the price? How does this change? What are the drag along rights? This itself is like a masterclass. Vivek probably will be able to talk a lot about this, but this is very, very critical, right? How deeply do you understand finances? So with that, I'm gonna wrap up the session. I hope this was helpful. Obviously, happy to have any questions and answers. You all can reach me, Ashim Jolly. I'm on LinkedIn by the same name. My email is with the team, so they can share. Do we have a quick 2 minutes for questions and answers, or should we have
One more 2 questions.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Please. Okay, so deep tech startup, do you go before revenue or after revenue? It depends, what stage you're at, what kind of R&D you're doing in deep tech, who are your potential clients. First of all, I was just telling somebody else earlier this morning, there are enough grants available in this country. So you have to be extremely smart. Most associations today will give you equity fee grants to at least do your initial research to get your first, as we call MVP or your first product. But if you think that you need another 3 years to do deep tech, there are actual deep tech investors in the country. So today, a lot of investors are not broad, but they're very verticalized. So there are folks who are only doing climate tech, there are folks who are only doing deep tech, B2B, SaaS, and that's all they do, right? So they've built capabilities and they've seen hundreds and thousands of those companies. So they'll be able to advise you very well as if you're ready or not, or what is the right time. Any questions? Yes, please.
So I understand that you invest a lot in startups. So what is the ideal percentage of dilution that an initial startup company can?
Cool. So what's the initial dilution of an initial startup? So there's a very rule of thumb in the country today that the first institutional round, which means when external angel investors or HNIs or a micro VC fund will come, they would like to take between 8 to 10% of the company. So that by default means that whatever you're valuing your company, you're going to give away 8 to 10%, right? And so that is a classic debate which led to also part of the reason why a lot of these companies are falling out, because in certain cities they said, oh, because I'm doing 1 crore of business, I will not give 10% for 10 crore. I think my business is valued a lot more. So a lot of these companies had raised money at ridiculous valuations at the early stage, and today they're not able to sustain those valuations because it's a very simple build-up story, right? The late-stage investors were obviously public market. When they go back into private equity, which is a larger stage of capital, will say that I will only make about 2-3x. So if a company is doing about 500 crores, I give you 1,000-1,200 crore valuation because that's where I'll exit. I'll make some money, right? But these guys are not even doing 50 crores, but they're valued at 1,000 crores, right? I mean, you guys read this every day. Where are these companies going to go? So nobody's going to foot the bill. So that ripple effect happened at the top of the pyramid, kind of came into mid-stage. So none of the companies were able to raise Series B and C. And therefore, now all these companies are hanging in Series A, which is why every day you read a newspaper, one company shutting after another, because they've raised money at these ridiculous valuations and nobody's going to bite into it. So either investors are writing that off, or very few companies are now able to, restructure their organization and find a way to meet closer to that valuation. Some of them are taking a valuation cut. Obviously, a lot of companies have taken a valuation cut to survive, but that's the reality of life, right? So a lot of founders, even today, when they come out, they say, oh, some family office in some part of the country is giving me this valuation, so should I raise? I say, well, go ahead. Where the problem is, you can raise that money today to please your ego, but after 2 years, no one's going to give you the money because in 2 years, you're not going to grow 30x. You're only going to grow 3x. We all know that. So be practical about your fundraising. It's okay. Investors also want to make money along with the founders, right? So you can't take investor for a ride and just say, oh, just because they put money, they'll find this, because that's not going to hold true anymore. So the dynamics of fundraising have completely changed. And as they say, business 101 or realities have, sunk in. So that's the sort of quick answer to your question. Any other
Actually, I
question?
have a follow-up question to that one.
Yes.
So you mentioned ridiculous valuations, right? So when a startup is pre-revenue or pre-launch, how do you come up with that ideal valuation?
Very tough question. I wish there was a... Yeah, okay, yeah, so I'll talk about safe note. So yeah, basically what happens is when you're pre-revenues, safe note is one idea, but basically you do convertible rounds. So what I was trying to get to is that you never do a price round. So you don't put a valuation to your business. You say that we're raising a convertible round, which is convertible to venture, which will convert into an equity at a later stage when we have revenues, and an external party will then give me capital at an amount, and whoever's taken this initial risk will get a discount to that valuation, right? So at that early stage, you're basically just raising money from friends, family, or angel investors at the convertible round, because then when a venture capital fund is coming in and they're pricing the round, these guys are getting a discount to it. So therefore, their share is already appreciated by 20-30%, and usually put a track. So it's 15, it's usually 15% within 6 months, 20% in 1 year, 25% up to 2 years, and otherwise, it kind of. So there's standard practices in the market. Does that help? Awesome. Good. I hope. Yes.
Sir, my name is Binu.
Yes.
And I have a startup in HR tech industry. We have been running this company for the past 3 years. You know that HR tech is heavily crowded with tech, WS, etc. So I have been teaching with many investors as well. My question to you is it necessary that your story needs to be extremely unique, knowing that HR tech industry, no one has captured more than 2% of the market share. There is enough and more opportunities in India itself, and considering the international opportunities, it will add up to that. One of the issues which I am having is everyone asks, why did you jump into this extremely crowded industrial area? And the second thing is how are you going to differentiate yourself? What is your story which you are going to tell me? I was telling that, feature-wise you cannot differentiate because what you have, they have come up with OpenAI based, some solutions. Yesterday we also launched the OpenAI based solution. So it is difficult to craft that particular story. Is it necessary or?
So let me give this, I think, for the benefit of everyone. So I don't think there's any industry which is not crowded today. HR tech, MarTech, EdTech, FinTech, Health Tech. There's always going to be some player out there, right? And again, I'm going to refer to Ramit. I wish he was in the room. He would love it, right? Everybody's trying to solve that, but it's his ability to be able to think through very deeply in solving every element of the journey, of the customer journey. So then it's going to come back to your ability to execute that business better than the other incumbent in the market to say that my go-to market is faster, right? So you figured out a hack that nobody else has figured out, or you figured out that that one product within the HR journey, whether it's employee engagement or it's payroll management or whatever, is far better than everybody else. So that's why people are using you. So you have to have something uniquely identified that is solving the need of the customer to say, I will use you versus somebody else. Because as customers today, I have 5 options, right? When I go to a retail store, also I have 5 options to choose from. Why do I pick brand A versus brand C? As a tech player, why do I use Azure versus Google Cloud versus somebody else? They're all giving me free credits. Right? So as a user, you're always poised for choices. The only way you want to differentiate yourself is either in your customer experience, which is, I think that is really becoming the bottom line, right? For any business really becoming who they are is the customer experience. Why do you go to a restaurant once, twice, thrice? It's the quality of food and the customer experience, right? If either of them are not right, you're not going to go. They could have great food, but if the customer experience sucks, you're not going to go back, right? Or if they have great customer experience, the food doesn't taste good, you're not going to go back. It's the same thing in tech, right? If your product is really solving a problem, great. But if the customer experience or your party who's installing and then the after sales support and all not great, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'll move to somebody else. That's the classic law of nature, right? Why do people continue using different businesses? Because they are finding that perfect spot. Look at PhonePe, Google Pay, Paytm. There's like 30 players, right? But still 2 of them lead the pack. Is because of the experience and the way they were able to position the market. And you have to keep relevant to the times, right? If you're not keeping up with times, you'll become extinct. That Nokia became extinct because they didn't keep up with time. And there are enough stories like that. I hope that answers. Fairly interactive audience, as I'd like to say it. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I hope this was helpful. Great, thank you.